Natalie Jenkins clutched the worn leather satchel to her chest as the stagecoach lurched to a stop in San Elizario, Texas, dust billowing around the wheels like a brown fog that settled on everything it touched. The year was 1878, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston with nothing but her belongings, a carefully worded contract folded in her reticule, and a heart full of practical expectations rather than romantic notions. She stepped down from the coach, her dark blue traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of Texas dirt despite her best efforts to keep it clean. The sun beat down mercilessly, so different from the temperate New England climate she had left behind. San Elizario was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon heat. The Rio Grande flowed nearby, and she could see the green line of cottonwood trees that marked its path through this arid landscape. "Miss Jenkins." A deep voice made her turn, and Natalie found herself looking up at a man who seemed to embody everything she had imagined about the West. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his cotton shirt. His face was sun-weathered, with fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh light. But it was his eyes themselves that caught her attention, a warm brown that held an unexpected gentleness despite the roughness of his appearance. "Yes," she said, straightening her spine, "and you must be Preston Dalton." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that was slightly too long curling at his collar. "Yes, madam, I hope your journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Natalie replied honestly, "but I expected that." Preston picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing, hoisting it onto his shoulder. "My wagon is just over here. I thought we might stop by the hotel first so you can freshen up, and then perhaps we could have supper and discuss the arrangements." Natalie appreciated his consideration. The letters they had exchanged over the past 6 months had been polite and businesslike. He needed a wife to help run his ranch and provide companionship. She needed security, and a fresh start after her father's death had left her penniless and at the mercy of distant relatives who made it clear she was a burden. It was a practical arrangement, one that would benefit them both. The contract in her bag spelled out the terms clearly: room, board, and a modest allowance in exchange for housekeeping, cooking, and eventually children if they were so blessed. What she had not expected was the way her heart had skipped when she first saw him, or the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled at her, a shy, tentative expression that softened his rugged features. The wagon ride through town gave Natalie a better view of San Elizario. Despite its small size, it was clearly a community with deep roots. Many of the buildings were adobe, their thick walls designed to keep out the heat. She saw a mix of people. Mexican families who had lived here long before Texas became part of the United States, Anglo settlers who had arrived more recently, and various traders and travelers passing through. The town had a church, a general store, a small hotel, and several other establishments that spoke to its role as a waypoint along the road between El Paso and Point South. Preston drove with easy competence, his large hands steady on the reins. "San Elizario is not Boston," he said, a statement of obvious fact that somehow did not sound apologetic. "But it is a good place. The people here look after one another." "I did not come expecting Boston," Natalie said. "I came expecting a new life, Mr. Dalton, whatever form that takes." He glanced at her and something flickered in his expression. "Preston, please, if we are to be married, I would prefer you call me by my given name. Then you must call me Natalie." "Natalie," he repeated, and the way he said her name, with a slight Texas drawl softening the syllables, made something flutter in her stomach. The hotel was modest but clean. Preston paid for a room and carried her trunk upstairs himself, despite the proprietor's offer to have his son help. He set it down gently near the window and then stood awkwardly near the door, his hat in his hands. "I thought we might meet in the hotel dining room in an hour," he said. "That should give you time to rest and refresh yourself." "That would be lovely, thank you." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Natalie, I want you to know that I am grateful you came all this way. I know this must be difficult, leaving everything familiar behind." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "We are both taking a risk, Preston. I hope we can make the best of it." After he left, Natalie sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to absorb everything. She had done it. She had actually traveled across the country to marry a man she had never met based on nothing more than a series of letters and a practical contract. Her aunt in Boston had called her foolish, had warned her about the dangers of the frontier, the roughness of Western men, the hardship of life outside civilization. But what choice had she really had? Stay in Boston as an unpaid servant in her cousin's home, subject to his wife's barely concealed resentment, or take a chance on building something of her own, even if it meant marrying a stranger. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into a fresh dress of deep green that brought out the color of her hazel eyes, and pinned her chestnut hair into a neater arrangement. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw a woman of 22 who appeared both determined and uncertain, a combination that felt entirely appropriate for her situation. Preston was waiting in the dining room, and he stood when she entered. He had also cleaned up, and she noticed he had shaved and changed his shirt. The gesture pleased her, a sign that he cared about making a good impression. They ordered roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables, and as they ate, they began the delicate process of getting to know one another beyond the carefully composed letters. "Your ranch," Natalie began. "Tell me about it." Preston's face lit up with obvious pride. "It is about 5 miles from town, along the river. Not as large as some of the spreads further north, but it is mine, free and clear. I have about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and enough land for good grazing. The house is adobe, built by the previous owner who sold out and moved to California. It is sturdy, stays cool in summer and warm in winter. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room. I have been doing my own cooking since I bought the place 2 years ago, but I will be honest, I am not good at it." Natalie smiled. "I am a competent cook. My mother made sure I learned all the domestic skills before she passed. I am sorry about your mother and your father. It must have been hard losing them both." "Yes," Natalie said quietly. "My mother died when I was 16 and my father followed 4 years later. He never recovered from losing her. They were very much in love." She said it matter-of-factly, but there was a wistfulness in her voice. Her parents' marriage had been a love match, rare in their social circle, where most unions were arranged for financial or social advantage. She had grown up watching them laugh together, seeing the way her father's face would soften when her mother entered a room, the gentle touches and shared glances that spoke of deep affection. It was perhaps foolish to hope for such a thing in her own marriage of convenience, but some small part of her could not help but wish for it. "That must have been something to see," Preston said. "My own parents had a solid marriage, built on respect and partnership. They ran the family farm together in Missouri until they both succumbed to fever when I was 19. I came west after that, looking for something of my own. So we are both orphans," Natalie observed, "both starting fresh." "Yes, I suppose we are." They talked more as the meal progressed. Preston told her about the rhythms of ranch life, the work of tending cattle, the challenges of the Texas climate with its scorching summers and occasional harsh winters. He spoke about his neighbors, including several Mexican families who had been ranching this land for generations, and from whom he had learned valuable skills. Natalie, in turn, told him about her life in Boston, her education at a finishing school, her love of reading, and her practical skills in household management. She did not dwell on the hardships of the past 2 years. The slow erosion of her dignity as her cousin's wife had relegated her to the status of unpaid servant. The way she had been made to feel like a burden despite her willingness to work. "I brought the contract," Natalie said when they had finished eating, pulling the folded paper from her reticule. "I thought we should review it together and ensure we both agree to the terms." Preston looked at the document but did not take it. "Natalie, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart sank. Was he going to back out? Tell her there had been some mistake? "I wrote those letters with all the business arrangements because I thought that was what you would expect, what you would need to feel secure in coming here. And all of it is true. I do need help running the ranch, and I would be honored if you would share that work with me. But the truth is, a contract feels wrong for what I am asking of you." "What do you mean?" Natalie asked carefully. Preston leaned forward, his brown eyes earnest. "I am asking you to be my wife, Natalie. Not my housekeeper with a legal agreement, not my employee who shares my bed. My wife, with all the respect and partnership that entails. I cannot promise you an easy life. Ranching is hard work, and there will be difficult times. But I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to make you happy, to treat you as an equal partner, and to build a real marriage with you." Natalie stared at him, her carefully constructed expectations crumbling. "But we barely know each other." "That is true," Preston acknowledged. "And I am not saying we will fall in love overnight, but I would like the chance for us to try. Not because a contract obligates us to certain duties, but because we choose to build something together." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Marry me tomorrow," he said. "Father Martinez can perform the ceremony. But instead of a business arrangement, let it be a real marriage. Give us both the chance to see if affection can grow between us. If after a year you are truly unhappy, if you decide this life is not for you, I will arrange for your passage back to Boston and provide you with enough money to start over. No questions, no recriminations." It was both more and less than she had expected. The contract had felt safe, clear boundaries and expectations spelled out in black and white. What Preston was offering was riskier, more open-ended, but also more honest. "You want a real marriage," she said slowly, "with the possibility of real feeling." "Yes," Preston said simply. "I have been alone for a long time, Natalie. I am not looking for a housekeeper. I am looking for a partner, a companion, someone to share my life with. I realize that may develop slowly, and I am willing to be patient. But I do not want our relationship defined by a legal document that reduces it to a transaction." Natalie folded the contract carefully and put it back in her reticule. Her mind raced with the implications of what he was asking. It would be easier in some ways to have clear expectations and obligations, but he was right that a true marriage could not be reduced to contractual terms. "All right," she said finally. "We will do it your way. But Preston, I need you to understand that I am taking an enormous leap of faith here." His face broke into a genuine smile, and she realized it transformed him, made him almost handsome in a rough, unpolished way. "I know you are, and I will do everything I can to prove myself worthy of that faith." That night, lying in the unfamiliar hotel bed, Natalie wondered if she had made the right choice. Everything had happened so quickly. Just that morning she had been on the stagecoach, rehearsing in her mind how she would handle this arranged marriage with professionalism and grace. Now she was agreeing to marry a man who spoke of partnership and patience, who wanted a real marriage instead of a business arrangement. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Preston arrived at the hotel wearing a clean suit that looked slightly uncomfortable on his large frame, as if he were more accustomed to work clothes. He carried a bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked himself, their bright colors a cheerful spot against his dark clothing. "I know they are not fancy," he said, offering them to her, "but they grow along the river near my ranch, and I thought they were pretty." "They are lovely," Natalie said, taking them. The gesture touched her more than expensive hothouse roses would have. He had taken the time and thought to bring her flowers on their wedding day. Father Martinez was an older Mexican priest with kind eyes and a gentle manner. The church was small and cool, its thick adobe walls keeping out the heat. There were no guests, just the priest and an older woman who served as a witness, but somehow that felt appropriate. This was just for them, the beginning of their private journey together. The ceremony was simple, conducted in both English and Spanish. Preston's voice was steady as he repeated his vows, and when it was Natalie's turn, she found her own voice surprisingly calm. This was real. She was marrying this man, casting her lot with his, agreeing to build a life in this harsh, beautiful country so far from everything she had known. When Father Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, Preston leaned down and kissed her gently, a chaste press of lips that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through her body. His lips were softer than she had expected, and she caught the scent of shaving soap and something else, something uniquely him. "Welcome to Texas, Mrs. Dalton," he murmured against her ear, and she felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. They had dinner at the hotel again, a simple wedding meal that nonetheless felt celebratory. Preston had arranged for a bottle of wine, and they toasted to their future with cautious optimism. "I should tell you," Preston said as they ate, "the ranch house has been prepared for your arrival. I had a woman from town come in and clean everything thoroughly, and I bought new linens for the bed. I want you to feel comfortable there." "That was thoughtful of you." "Natalie, about tonight," he began, and she saw color rise in his weathered cheeks. "I know we are married now, but I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. We can take our time with that aspect of our marriage." Natalie appreciated his consideration, even as she felt her own face heat. "I think it would be best if we do take things slowly," she agreed. "Everything has happened so quickly." "There is a spare bedroom you can use until you feel more comfortable," Preston said. "I want you to know you have choices, Natalie. I meant what I said about building a real marriage. That means respecting your wishes and giving you time to adjust." The drive to the ranch that afternoon gave Natalie her first real look at the land that would be her new home. The road followed the Rio Grande, and she could see the ribbon of green vegetation that marked the river's course through the brown landscape. Preston pointed out landmarks as they drove. A particular bend in the river where fish could be caught, a stand of cottonwoods that provided shade on hot days, the boundary markers of his property. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, and Natalie caught her breath. It was larger than she had expected, a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. The walls were thick and solid, painted white with dark wood accents. Nearby stood a barn, a corral with several horses and various outbuildings. It was not grand by Boston standards, but there was something solid and reassuring about it, a sense of permanence that spoke of hard work and careful planning. "What do you think?" Preston asked, and she could hear the anxiety in his voice. "I think it is wonderful," Natalie said honestly. "It is a real home, Preston." His relief was visible. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her belongings into the house. The interior was cooler than the outside air, the thick walls doing their job. The main room was spacious, with a large fireplace on one wall and furniture that was simple but well made. The kitchen was surprisingly modern, with a good cookstove and ample workspace. He had not exaggerated about the bedrooms. There were indeed 3, each a decent size with windows that let in light. "I use the largest bedroom," Preston said, showing her to a room at the end of the hall. "But this one has a nice view of the river, and I thought you might like it." The room he indicated was indeed pleasant, with a comfortable-looking bed covered in what must be the new linens he had mentioned, a dresser, a washstand, and a rocking chair near the window. Natalie set down her satchel and looked out at the view. She could see the green line of the river and the mountains in the distance, their peaks hazy in the afternoon heat. "It is perfect," she said. Over the following days, Natalie began to settle into the rhythms of ranch life. She rose early with Preston, prepared breakfast while he tended to the horses, and spent her days cleaning, cooking, and learning about her new environment. The work was different from what she had done in Boston, but not more difficult, just unfamiliar. Preston was patient with her, explaining things without condescension. He showed her where he kept supplies, how to work the pump that brought water from the well, which chickens were the best layers and which were likely to be ornery. He introduced her to his closest neighbor, a Mexican rancher named Miguel Hernandez, who lived with his family about 3 miles away. The Hernandez family welcomed her warmly, with Miguel's wife, Rosa, immediately taking Natalie under her wing. Rosa was a stout, energetic woman about 10 years older than Natalie, with a ready laugh and a seemingly endless font of practical knowledge about life in this part of Texas. "You will learn," Rosa assured her in accented but clear English. "It is different here, yes, but you are strong. I can see it in your eyes." Natalie appreciated the friendship Rosa offered, the sense that she was not alone in this new place. Rosa taught her which plants near the river were edible, how to make tortillas from scratch, and which remedies to use for common ailments. In return, Natalie shared some of the recipes she knew from Boston and helped Rosa's oldest daughter practice her English. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, Natalie and Preston would sit on the porch and talk. These conversations became Natalie's favorite part of the day. Away from the pressure of work and the awkwardness of their new relationship, they could simply talk, learning about one another in a way that letters had never allowed. Preston told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to increase the herd and perhaps raise horses as well as cattle. He spoke about his childhood in Missouri, growing up on a farm with 3 brothers, 2 of whom had been lost in the war between the states. His voice would grow quiet when he spoke of them, and Natalie began to understand the loneliness that had driven him to seek a wife. She, in turn, shared more about her own life, the good years before her parents died when she had been surrounded by books and learning, and the harder years after, when she had learned what it meant to be dependent on the charity of relatives who saw her as an obligation rather than family. "I wanted my own place," she admitted one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "Not just a home, but somewhere I belonged, where I had a right to be, not as a favor but as an equal partner. That is why I answered your advertisement, even though everyone told me I was crazy to consider going west to marry a stranger." Preston reached over and took her hand, a gesture that was becoming more natural between them. "You are not crazy. You are brave, and I am glad you came, Natalie. More glad than I can properly express." Their relationship was developing in unexpected ways. There was an ease between them that Natalie had not anticipated, a growing comfort that made the house feel more like a home each day. Preston was unfailingly courteous, always asking her opinion on decisions about the ranch, treating her as the partner he had promised she would be. But there was also an undercurrent of awareness, a tension that was not unpleasant but was definitely present. She found herself noticing small things about him. The way his hands looked when he worked with rope, strong and capable. The sound of his laugh, which was rare but genuine when it came. The kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, and her heart would skip in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. 3 weeks after her arrival, a problem arose that tested their growing partnership. Preston came in from checking the cattle one afternoon with a troubled expression. "We have lost several head," he said without preamble. "Either strayed or been stolen. I need to ride out tomorrow and search for them, but it could take several days." "Then I will come with you," Natalie said immediately. Preston looked surprised. "It will be rough, Natalie. Sleeping on the ground, long days in the saddle. I had thought to ask Miguel to check in on you while I am gone." "I am your wife and your partner," Natalie said firmly. "If there is trouble with the ranch, I should be there. Besides, I am a fair rider. My father kept horses and I rode regularly in Boston." She could see the conflict on his face, concern warring with respect for her wishes. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But we leave at first light and you will do exactly as I say. If there are rustlers, it could be dangerous." They packed supplies that evening, and Natalie dressed in the most practical clothes she owned, a split skirt she had made for riding and a sturdy blouse. When Preston saw her, his eyebrows rose appreciatively. "You look ready for anything," he said with a smile. They rode out as the sun was rising, following the trail of the missing cattle. Preston was an excellent tracker, able to read signs in the dust and grass that Natalie could barely see. They followed the trail north and west, away from the river and into rougher country. As they rode, Preston taught her to watch for the same signs he saw, explaining how to tell fresh tracks from old, how to gauge the size of a group by the marks they left. Natalie found herself fascinated, seeing this land through new eyes. It was not the barren emptiness she had first thought, but a complex landscape, full of information for those who knew how to read it. They made camp that first night beside a small creek, and Preston built a fire while Natalie prepared a simple meal from their supplies. As darkness fell and the stars came out in a vast blanket overhead, brighter than she had ever seen in Boston, Natalie felt a strange contentment settle over her. "This is beautiful," she said, looking up at the sky. "I never knew there were so many stars." Preston, sitting beside her on a blanket near the fire, followed her gaze. "One of my favorite things about living out here," he said, "makes you feel small but not in a bad way. Like you are part of something much bigger." "I understand that," Natalie said softly. She was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth of his body, the solid strength of him. They had been sleeping in separate rooms, maintaining a respectful distance, but out here there was only one bedroll. Preston seemed to realize this at the same moment. "I laid out both our bedrolls," he said, gesturing to where he had arranged them on opposite sides of the fire. "But Natalie, it gets cold at night out here. If you get too cold, wake me and we can share blankets. Nothing improper, just staying warm." "Thank you," she said, touched by his continued consideration. She did wake in the night, shivering despite her blankets. The fire had burned down to coals and the desert cold had seeped into her bones. Before she could second-guess herself, she got up and moved to Preston's side of the fire. "Preston," she whispered. He woke immediately, alert in the way of someone accustomed to being ready for trouble. "Natalie." "What is wrong?" "I am cold," she admitted, Without a word, he lifted his blanket and she slid under it, pressing against his warmth. He wrapped an arm around her and she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Better?" he asked, his voice rumbling in his chest. "Much better," she murmured, and surprisingly, she fell asleep almost immediately, feeling safer than she had in a long time. They found the cattle the next day, strayed into a canyon rather than stolen. It took most of the day to round them up and drive them back toward the ranch. Working together, Natalie and Preston developed an easy rhythm, communicating with gestures and short calls as they guided the animals. By the time they returned home 2 days later, dirty and exhausted, Natalie felt she had passed some kind of test. She had proven to Preston and to herself that she was not some delicate Eastern lady who would wilt at the first sign of hardship. She was a rancher's wife, capable of doing what needed to be done. That night, after they had both bathed and eaten, Preston asked her to sit with him in the main room. He looked serious, and Natalie felt a flutter of nervousness. "Natalie, these past few weeks have been some of the best of my life," he began. "Having you here, working beside you, getting to know you, it has made me realize something." "What is that?" she asked, her heart beating faster. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know it has not been long, and I am not asking you to say the same back to me, but I wanted you to know. You are not just my wife on paper, not just a partner for the ranch. You have become dear to me, Natalie. Very dear." Tears sprang to her eyes and she reached for his hand. "Preston, I think I have been falling in love with you too. I did not expect it and I am still a bit frightened by it, but it is true." He pulled her closer, and this time when he kissed her, it was not the chaste kiss of their wedding but something deeper, full of the longing and affection that had been building between them. Natalie kissed him back, her arms going around his neck, feeling the strength of him and the gentleness of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to be sure," he said. "I do not want to rush you into anything." "I am sure," Natalie said. "Take me to bed, Preston. Our bed, not separate rooms anymore." He stood and lifted her in his arms, carrying her down the hall to his bedroom. Their bedroom now. He set her down gently and lit the lamp, its soft glow filling the room with golden light. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward in moments as they learned each other but beautiful in its honesty. Preston was patient and careful with her, and Natalie felt any lingering fear melt away as they came together. This was right. This was what marriage should be, not a cold contract but a true joining of two people who were learning to love one another. Afterward, lying in his arms, Natalie felt a sense of completeness she had never known. "I was expecting a contract," she said softly, "but you gave me a vow instead. A real vow, a real marriage. And I would make that vow to you every day if you asked," Preston replied, kissing her forehead. "I love you, Natalie Dalton, my wife, my partner, my love." "I love you too," she whispered, and knew it was true. The months that followed were not without challenges. Ranch life was hard, with long days of work and the constant worry about weather, prices, and the health of the herd. But they faced everything together, their love deepening with each shared sunrise and sunset. Natalie threw herself into making the ranch a true home. She planted a garden near the house, coaxing vegetables from the hard soil with techniques Rosa taught her. She learned to make butter and cheese, to preserve food for the winter, to mend harnesses and clothing. Her hands grew rougher, her skin tanned despite her bonnets, but she had never felt stronger or more alive. Preston, for his part, continued to treat her as the equal partner he had promised she would be. He consulted her on major decisions about the ranch, valued her opinions, and made sure she knew she was appreciated. But beyond the practical partnership, there was also deep affection and growing passion. They would steal moments together during the day, a quick kiss in the barn, a touch of hands as they worked side by side. At night, they would come together with a passion that never seemed to dim, finding joy and comfort in one another. As autumn arrived and the brutal summer heat finally eased, Natalie realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she said nothing, afraid to hope, but when another month passed and she began to feel nauseous in the mornings, she knew. She told Preston one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am with child," she said simply. The joy on his face was unrestrained. He let out a whoop of happiness and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby, Natalie." "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "Please does not begin to cover it," he said, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "You have made me the happiest man in Texas, maybe in the whole country." They told Rosa and Miguel first, and Rosa embraced Natalie with tears in her eyes. "I knew you were strong," she said. "You will be a wonderful mother." The pregnancy progressed through the winter months. Preston became almost comically protective, trying to keep Natalie from any hard work, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. They compromised, with Natalie continuing to do lighter tasks, but allowing Preston to take on more of the heavy labor. As her belly grew, Natalie found herself thinking often about her own mother, wishing she could ask her advice, share this experience with her. But she had Rosa, and through Rosa, a whole community of women who rallied around her with support and wisdom. "Your first baby always makes you nervous," Rosa told her as they sat together one afternoon, Natalie's hands busy with knitting small garments. "But you will know what to do when the time comes. The body knows, even when the mind is afraid." Preston had insisted on having the doctor from El Paso come out a month before the baby was due, paying him to stay in town so he would be available when Natalie went into labor. It was an expensive gesture, but one that showed how much he cared for her safety and the baby's. The labor began on a warm spring morning in April of 1879, just over a year since Natalie had arrived in San Elizario. Preston rode immediately to fetch the doctor and Rosa, his face pale with worry despite Natalie's assurances that she was fine. Rosa arrived first and took charge with calm efficiency, and having her there eased Natalie's nerves. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Natalie wondered if she had the strength to continue. But Rosa coached her through each contraction, and the doctor monitored everything to ensure both she and the baby were safe. Preston paced outside, forbidden from the birthing room by convention but unable to stray far from the house. Finally, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry rang out, strong and healthy. "It is a boy." Rosa called out, and a moment later Preston burst into the room despite all propriety, desperate to see his wife and child. Natalie, exhausted but radiant, held their son in her arms. The baby had a surprising amount of dark hair and his father's brown eyes. Preston knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his weathered face as he looked at his wife and child. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You are both perfect. Natalie, I do not have words for what you have given me." "We made him together," Natalie said softly. "Our son, Preston. The first of many blessings, I hope." They named him James, after Preston's father. James Dalton came into the world strong and healthy, with a powerful set of lungs he was not shy about using. The first few weeks were exhausting as Natalie and Preston adjusted to parenthood, learning to function on interrupted sleep and figuring out what each different cry meant. But watching Preston with their son filled Natalie with a love so fierce, it sometimes took her breath away. This big, rough cowboy was so gentle with the tiny baby, holding him with infinite care, talking to him in a soft voice, walking the floor with him when he was fussy. James clearly already adored his father, settling quickly when Preston held him. The ranch continued to prosper. That summer's calf crop was strong, and Preston was able to sell cattle at a good price. With the profits, he hired a young man named Tom to help with the daily work, freeing up more of his time to spend with Natalie and James. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Natalie's days were full with caring for James and managing the household, but she also found time to continue her partnership with Preston in running the ranch. She kept the accounts, made decisions about supplies and household matters, and even began corresponding with other ranchers' wives, building a network of information and support. James thrived, growing from a tiny baby into a chubby, happy infant who smiled at everyone and seemed fascinated by everything around him. His first word was "da," said while reaching for Preston, and his first steps were taken between his mother and father on the porch one evening as the sun set over the mountains. When James was 2, Natalie became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier, perhaps because she was not adjusting to a new life and climate at the same time. Preston was just as attentive, just as protective, and just as excited as before. Their daughter was born in the winter of 1881, a perfect baby girl with Natalie's lighter coloring and delicate features. They named her Mary after Natalie's mother, and if Preston had been gentle with James, he was absolutely besotted with Mary. "I have a daughter," he would say with wonder, holding her tiny hand in his large, calloused one. "A little girl. Natalie, how did we get so lucky we made our own luck?" Natalie would reply. "We took a chance on each other and look what we built." And it was true. From that tentative beginning, two strangers brought together by practical necessity, they had built a life full of love and purpose. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and their marriage had become everything Natalie had never quite dared to hope for. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. Preston's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread, and he was able to buy additional land when a neighbor decided to move east. The Dalton Ranch became one of the most successful in the area, known not just for the quality of its cattle, but for the partnership at its heart. Natalie never forgot those early days, the leap of faith she had taken in coming west, the way Preston had seen what she needed before she had fully understood it herself. She had been expecting a contract, clear terms and defined obligations. Instead, Preston had given her a vow, a promise to build a real marriage based on respect, partnership, and love. And what a marriage it had become. Through hot summers and cold winters, through the challenges of raising children and running a ranch, through moments of fear and frustration and exhaustion, their love had only grown stronger. They had learned each other's rhythms, understood each other's needs, built a foundation of trust and affection that could weather any storm. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved everything about ranch life, following his father everywhere, and soaking up knowledge about cattle and horses. Mary was more bookish, like her mother, but she also had a gentle way with animals that suggested she would find her own place in ranch life. And there were more children. Another son born in 1883, named Peter after Natalie's father, and twin girls in 1886 who kept everyone running. The house that had once seemed so large and empty was now always full of noise and life, and Natalie loved every chaotic moment of it. Rosa became like a grandmother to her children, and the friendship between the Dalton and Hernandez families deepened over the years, their children growing up together, their ranches cooperating when challenges arose. One evening, as they approached their 10th anniversary, Preston and Natalie managed to steal a rare moment alone on the porch. The children were all asleep, worn out from a full day of play, and the ranch was quiet under the stars. "You remember when you first arrived?" Preston asked, pulling Natalie close against his side. "You stood there with your contract, so determined to keep everything businesslike and practical." Natalie laughed softly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I had no idea what I was walking into. And then you told me you did not want a contract, that you wanted a real marriage, and I thought you were either the bravest or the craziest man I had ever met." "Maybe a bit of both," Preston said with a chuckle. "But I knew the moment I saw you that a contract would never be enough." "You deserved more than that, Natalie. We both did." "You were right," she said, turning to kiss him. "This is so much more than I ever imagined. You gave me a vow, Preston, and you have kept it every single day." "As you have kept yours," he replied. "You made this house a home, Natalie. You made my life complete. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "Such pretty words from a rough cowboy," she teased gently. "You bring out the poet in me," he said, and they both laughed, the easy laughter of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other deeply. More years passed, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They weathered droughts and storms, celebrated good years and struggled through harder ones. Miguel passed away when Natalie was 35, and she and Preston were there to support Rosa and her family through their grief. James, at 16, was already talking about expanding the ranch, bringing new ideas and energy that both excited and occasionally exasperated his father. But through it all, the love between Natalie and Preston remained the anchor of their family. They had built something rare and precious, a partnership that encompassed every aspect of their lives. They worked together, laughed together, raised their children together, and came together each night with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their early days. When people asked Natalie about coming west as a mail-order bride, she would smile and tell them it was the best decision she had ever made. She had left behind everything familiar, traveling 2,000 miles to marry a stranger based on nothing more than letters and hope. She had been expecting a contract, a business arrangement that would provide security and stability. Instead, Preston Dalton had given her a vow, a promise to build a real marriage based on love and partnership. And in keeping that vow, he had given her everything she had never quite dared to dream of: a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that grew stronger with each passing year. By the time Natalie was 40, the ranch was a true family operation. James was managing much of the day-to-day work alongside his father. Mary had become an expert at breeding and training horses. Peter was showing an aptitude for the business side of ranching. And the twins were still young but already showing signs of the strong Dalton spirit. The original 3-bedroom house had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, and there was talk of building a separate house for James when he eventually married. Natalie sometimes sat on the porch in the evening, the same porch where she and Preston had spent so many hours talking and dreaming, and marveled at the life they had built. She thought about that young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in San Elizario so many years ago, frightened but determined, carrying a contract in her bag and very modest expectations in her heart. She had gotten so much more. She had found love, real and deep and lasting. She had found a partner who truly saw her as an equal, who valued her opinions and her contributions. She had found a home, not just a house but a place where she belonged absolutely and completely. She had found purpose in building this ranch, in raising these children, in being part of this community. And it had all started with a cowboy who understood that some things could not be reduced to contractual obligations, who had the wisdom and the courage to offer a vow instead of a contract, to reach for something real rather than settling for something merely practical. Preston joined her on the porch, his hair now streaked with gray, his face more lined than it had been when they first met, but his eyes still held the same warmth and love that had made her heart skip all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her and reaching for her hand. "About how lucky I am," Natalie said simply. "About how a terrified girl from Boston somehow ended up with the best life imaginable." "Not lucky," Preston said, raising her hand to his lips. "Brave. You were brave enough to take a chance, brave enough to build a life in a strange place, brave enough to let yourself love me." "We were both brave," Natalie said. "You were brave enough to tell me you wanted more than a contract, brave enough to be patient while I learned to trust you, brave enough to build a real marriage with me." "Best decision I ever made," Preston said firmly. "Asking you to marry me, really marry me, not just sign some papers and go through the motions. That moment when you agreed, when you took that leap of faith with me, that was when my life truly began." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The mountains in the distance were silhouetted against the colorful sky, and the sound of the river carried on the evening breeze. From inside the house came the sounds of their children, the life they had created together. "You ever miss Boston?" Preston asked, a question he had asked before over the years. "Not even a little," Natalie answered, the same answer she always gave. "Everything I love is right here." And it was true. This land, this life, this family, this was where she belonged. Not because a contract had obligated her to be here, but because she had chosen it, and in choosing it had found everything her heart had been seeking. Their children married and had children of their own. James wed the daughter of another rancher, a strong, practical young woman who reminded Natalie a bit of herself at that age. Mary surprised everyone by marrying a young lawyer from El Paso, who had come to handle some business for the ranch, and had been instantly smitten with the horse-loving rancher's daughter. Peter took over more of the business operations as Preston began to slow down, though he never truly retired, always finding something that needed his attention. Grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and Natalie loved watching Preston with them. The same gentleness and patience he had shown with their own children now lavished on the next generation. The ranch that had once been Preston's alone was now a true family legacy, built over decades of hard work and love. As they grew older together, Preston and Natalie's love only deepened. They had the ease of two people who had weathered life's storms side by side, who knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, who could communicate with a glance across a crowded room. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye when one of them rode out, still came together at night with affection and tenderness. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, and the house was filled with music and laughter and joy. Rosa, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, pulled Natalie aside at one point. "You remember when you first came?" Rosa asked. "So scared, trying so hard to be brave." "I remember," Natalie said, smiling at the memory. "I knew then you would be all right," Rosa said. "I saw how Preston looked at you, and I saw the strength in you. You were meant for this life, even if you did not know it yet." "I was meant for him," Natalie said, watching Preston across the room as he laughed at something one of their sons had said. Everything else followed from that. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the house was finally quiet, Preston and Natalie stood together on their porch, looking out at the land they had built their life on. 25 years, Preston said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you stepped off that stagecoach, and sometimes it feels like you have been with me forever. Both are true, Natalie said. Every day with you feels new, but I also cannot imagine a time when you were not part of my life. I have been thinking, Preston said, about that contract you brought with you, the one you folded up and put away when I asked you to marry me for real instead. What about it? Natalie asked. You still have it? Yes, in the bottom of my trunk. Why? I want to burn it, Preston said. I want us to stand here together and burn it, watch it turn to ash, because it never had anything to do with what we built. Our marriage was never about obligations and terms. It was always about love and partnership and choosing each other every single day. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. That is a beautiful idea. They went inside, and Natalie retrieved the contract from her trunk where it had lain untouched for 25 years. The paper was yellowed now, the ink faded, but the words were still legible, that businesslike agreement that had never truly governed their relationship. Back on the porch, Preston started a small fire in a metal basin. Together, they held the contract, and then together they let it fall into the flames. They watched as the paper caught, curled, turned black, and finally crumbled to ash. We have been expecting a contract, Preston said softly, but what we got was a vow. A real vow, kept every day for 25 years and counting. For 50 more years, Natalie said, leaning against him, and then forever after that. Forever after that, Preston agreed, kissing the top of her head. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes of time. Preston's hair went fully gray, and he moved a bit slower, but his love for Natalie never dimmed. Natalie's hands became more arthritic, making some tasks harder, but she adapted and continued to be the heart of their family. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, each year adding new layers to their love story. Their children were now firmly established in their own lives, and their grandchildren were growing up. The ranch continued to thrive under the family's collective management, adapting to new times while maintaining the core values Preston and Natalie had established. The Dalton name meant something in San Elizario and beyond: honesty, hard work, and family. When Preston was 65 and Natalie 63, he surprised her with a trip back east. It was their first time leaving the ranch for more than a few days in years, and Natalie was both excited and nervous about returning to Boston after so long away. The city had changed dramatically since she had left. It was bigger, busier, more industrial. They walked through the neighborhoods she had known as a girl, and Natalie found herself feeling like a stranger in the place where she had grown up. This was not her home anymore. It might look familiar in some ways, but it held none of the warmth and belonging she felt at the ranch. "Are you glad we came?" Preston asked as they sat in a hotel room that felt too small and too enclosed after the open spaces of Texas. "I am glad to see it," Natalie said honestly. "But I am more glad to know that I do not miss it. My home is with you, Preston. It always has been, from the moment I chose to believe in your vow instead of that contract." They returned to Texas after 2 weeks, and Natalie felt her heart lift as the familiar landscape came into view. This was home. This harsh, beautiful land, this ranch that she and Preston had built together, this family that filled her life with purpose and joy, this was where she belonged. More years passed, each one precious. Preston finally did retire from the daily work of the ranch when he was 70, though he still walked the property every day, checking on things, offering advice to his sons and grandsons. Natalie, too, stepped back from the more strenuous work, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and she remained the family matriarch, the one everyone turned to for wisdom and guidance. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by family. 4 generations now, all stemming from that leap of faith two strangers had taken in 1878. Looking around at the gathering, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Natalie felt a profound sense of contentment. This was their legacy, not just the land and the cattle and the buildings, but this family built on a foundation of love and partnership. As they grew older, Preston and Natalie spent more and more time simply being together, talking about everything and nothing, remembering their life together, enjoying the peace of having built something lasting. They still held hands when they sat together, still kissed each other goodnight, still whispered "I love you" multiple times each day. "I never thanked you properly," Natalie said one evening as they sat on their porch, now both in their early 70s. "For what?" Preston asked. "For seeing what I needed before I knew it myself. For understanding that I needed more than a contract, even if I was too scared to ask for it. For giving me a vow instead. For insisting on building a real marriage even when it would have been easier to keep things businesslike and practical." Preston was quiet for a moment, and when Natalie looked at him, she saw tears in his eyes. "You do not need to thank me for that, Natalie. You were worth taking a risk for. You were worth everything. And you gave me just as much. You took a chance on me, on this life, on this wild land. You built this home, you raised our children, you stood beside me through everything. If anyone should be grateful, it is me." "Then we will both be grateful," Natalie said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Grateful for each other, for this life, for every single day we have had together." "Every single day," Preston agreed, his arm coming around her shoulders. "And every day still to come." They lived to celebrate their 45th anniversary, a remarkable achievement in a time when life was hard and uncertain. Preston was 76 now, Natalie 74, and while they moved slowly and tired more easily, their love remained as strong as ever. The ranch was firmly in the hands of the next generation, but everyone still looked to Preston and Natalie as the foundation of the family. On a warm spring evening, sitting on the porch they had shared for so many years, Preston turned to Natalie with the same warm expression she had fallen in love with all those decades ago. "You know what I am most proud of?" he asked. "What is that?" Natalie replied, squeezing his hand. "That every day, every single day for 45 years, I kept my vow to you. To love you, to honor you, to treat you as an equal partner, to build a real marriage with you. That is my greatest accomplishment, Natalie. Not the ranch, not the success we have had, but the life I built with you." "And I kept my vow too," Natalie said softly. "To stand beside you, to share your life, to love you through everything. We did it, Preston. We built exactly what you promised that first day, a real marriage, a true partnership." "The best thing I ever did was give you a vow instead of a contract," Preston said. "The best thing I ever did was accept it," Natalie replied. They sat together as the sun set over the mountains, the same view they had watched thousands of times before, never tiring of its beauty. The land stretched out before them, the ranch they had built, the home they had created, the legacy they would leave behind. Preston passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 78, with Natalie beside him holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, feeling the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But she also felt profound gratitude for the 47 years they had shared, for the life they had built together. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, still sharp-minded and strong-spirited even as her body weakened. She spent her time telling stories to her great-grandchildren, sharing memories of the early days, of coming west to marry a stranger, of learning to love and be loved. "Your great-grandfather was a remarkable man," she would tell them. "Not because he was perfect, he was not, but because he understood that some things are worth taking a risk for, that love is stronger than contracts, that a true partnership can weather any storm." When Natalie passed away at the age of 81, she was buried beside Preston on a rise overlooking the ranch, their headstones side by side, just as they had stood side by side in life. The whole community turned out for her funeral, testament to the respect and love she had earned over more than 50 years in Texas. Their children, all grown with families of their own, gathered at the ranch house after the funeral. James, now a gray-haired man in his 50s, stood on the porch and looked out at the land his parents had built their life on. "They really did have something special," he said to his siblings. "Not just luck, but something they built together day by day, year by year." "Mother told me once," Mary said, "that she came expecting a contract, but Father gave her a vow instead. She said that made all the difference." "He kept that vow every day," Peter added. "You could see it in how he looked at her, how he spoke to her, how he treated her. That was real love." "And she gave it right back," one of the twins said. "They were partners in every sense of the word. That is the legacy they left us, not just this ranch, but the example of what a marriage should be." The Dalton Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, growing and changing with the times, but always maintaining the values its founders had established. And the story of Preston and Natalie was told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the greatest risks bring the greatest rewards, that true love is worth waiting for and working for, and that a vow kept is worth more than any contract ever written. In San Elizario, where their story had begun, people still talked about the mail-order bride from Boston who had come west expecting a business arrangement and found true love instead. They talked about the cowboy who had the wisdom to offer her a real marriage, who understood that some things cannot be reduced to terms and conditions. Their love story became legend, but it was more than just a story. It was proof that love, real and true and lasting, was possible even in the harshest of circumstances. It was proof that two strangers could become partners, could build a life together that was richer and deeper than either could have imagined. It was proof that sometimes the best things in life come not from careful planning and contracts, but from taking a leap of faith and trusting in the power of a vow. The house they had shared, expanded and modernized over the years, but still recognizably, the same structure Preston had brought Natalie to all those years ago, remained the heart of the ranch. The porch where they had spent so many evenings talking and dreaming was still there, and family members would often sit there in the evening, looking out at the same view Preston and Natalie had loved, feeling the presence of their legacy all around them. And sometimes, on warm spring evenings when the sun set over the mountains in shades of orange and pink and purple, if you sat very still on that porch, you could almost feel them there still. A cowboy and his bride, two people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for, whose love had built not just a ranch but a family, not just a marriage but a true partnership that had lasted until death and beyond. Their story was one of courage and faith, of taking risks and keeping promises, of building something real and lasting in a harsh and unforgiving land. It was a story of how love, when given freely and honored faithfully, can transform everything. It was the story of how a contract can never capture what matters most, but a vow, given from the heart and kept every day, can build something that lasts forever. Natalie Jenkins had stepped off that stagecoach in San Elizario in 1878 expecting a contract, a business arrangement, a practical solution to her problems. Instead, Preston Dalton had given her a a promise to build a real marriage based on love and partnership. And in accepting that vow, in choosing to believe in the possibility of something more, Natalie had found everything she had never quite dared to dream of. Their love story was complete, with a beginning full of uncertainty, a middle rich with love and family and purpose, and an ending that was really just a transition, because the legacy they built together lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the community they had been part of for so many years. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth aspiring to. A story of two people who took a chance on each other and built something beautiful, something lasting, something real. A story that proved that sometimes the best things in life cannot be captured in a contract, but must be lived day by day, through a vow given and kept, through love freely chosen and faithfully maintained, through a partnership that endures all challenges and grows stronger with each passing year. And so the story of Preston Dalton and Natalie Jenkins, the cowboy and his mail-order bride who became so much more to each other, lived on as a testament to the power of love, the importance of partnership, and the beauty of a vow kept faithfully until the very end and beyond into eternity.